In the last video, I talked about how some of the biggest money sellers make is on the second exit, not the first. And today, I'm going to prove it with some simple numbers here in Excel. We're going to compare two real-life scenarios. The first, 100% sale today, and the second, a 70% sale today, in addition to a 30% equity rollover that's held for 3 years prior to the next monetization or exit of the business. So, to that effect, let's start working through some of the numbers. So, let's say, set this up, and we're going to say overall proceeds comparison, 100% versus sale versus equity rollover scenario. Now, let's say, what are some of the assumptions? Let's make some assumptions. So let's say company EBITDA, it doesn't really matter for industry. We're just going to use some round numbers for now, but let's just say it's a $2 million EBITDA company, right? We're going to say the multiple being applied is going to be, let's say it's a 6 times multiple for easy round numbers. And that would yield, let's say, 2 times 6, valuation of $12 million. This is going to be some simple round math for the company. So let's say we've got scenario A and scenario B. Scenario A is going to be the 100% sale. Scenario B is going to be 30% rollover. So in the 100% sale situation, let's just say, let's paint a picture of 4 years. So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. All right, let's go to year 1 now. And let's say sale. All right, and we sold the business for $12 million, as we mentioned. And let's assume it's all long-term capital gains, and let's take a, effective tax rate and just say long-term capital gains tax of 25% is going to be negative $3 million. And we say net proceeds is going to be $9 million. Now, in scenario 2, right, we're going to have 2 elements here. So really, in this case, going to be equity. Let's just say cash. Let's make some here and call it rollover. So in this case, we're not going to have any rollover, so it's a moot point. Right, scenario B, cash, rollover. All right, so let's do the same thing for scenario B. In this scenario, we're going to say we're going to sell 70% of the company. So let's say 0.84. Let's apply the same 25% long-term capital gains tax. We'll have net proceeds of $6.3 million in cash. Rollover is going to be 30%, so 0.3 times sales. Now, key thing to keep in mind here is that the rollover, again, you can see 3.6 plus 8.4 is 12, so it's the same total amount of money, but the rollover is not taxed. It's not taxed until it's ultimately monetized, and you'll see the impact that that has. So now, let's look at years 2, 3, and 4 real quick. And say, okay, so let's just do all of scenario A first to kind of clear through the numbers. In scenario A, you have $9 million. Let's assume you invest all of that $9 million and it compounds at a rate of 7%, which is kind of like the average broader stock market S&P over the last 100 years. So it's a good kind of metric to utilize. So now let's just say, we'll label it interest. We're going to have basically the same thing for each of these 3 years here. Let's say year 2, we have $9 million, we times out at 1.07. So now that gets us to 9.63. So if we took the 63 and minus that, right, from the 9 million that we originally had, the interest we got in year 1 is 630,000. Now we want to take compounding interest into effect. So what you'll see is like, okay, let's assume now that this amount then compounds by 7 more percent. Right now we're at 10.03 or 10.3. Let's subtract that in the early year, and you'll see every year you get a little bit more interest. So even though we're assuming a 7% interest rate, we're still getting a little bit more each year because of compound interest, which is the 8th wonder of the world in many ways, right? So now let's compound that again, times 1.07, that's 11. Let's subtract this from the last year's amount, and get 721. So over this 4-year time period, we're going to say total proceeds is the 9 million. Total interest is going to be interest from year 2, interest from year 3, interest from year 4, $2 million. Net of everything, you're going to get $11 million kind of all in, end of the day. And that is good. That is definitively not a bad situation. And so that's kind of our baseline. Is like if you took all the cash today and invested it intelligently, that's what it would look like. Now, let's show that in comparison to the equity rollover situation. So in this situation, we're going to do a similar math for the cash component of it first. That's going to be simple since we just did that, right? So let's take this times 1.07. You'll see that the formula is basically going to carry through for everything. So if we were to say total proceeds, total interest, rollover is going to be kind of the third magic element here. But let's at least get that first element baked in. So we've got 6.3, which is going to reference the amount we got at closing. And then we're going to have 1.41, which is the aggregation of the combination of each 3 years of interest, right? So that's what it is right now. All right. So now let's see the magic of the rollover. So we got 3.6 million. Now let's assume that rollover. Now this is the neat thing because you're selling it into a private equity firm or a larger organization that already kind of has the game plan on how to grow it. They're already usually a few innings into the growth of that thing. And so I would say we've had, again, I said in other videos, we've had some situations as low as call it 1.8 to 2 times over the 3-year period. We've had other situations that have been as high as 6, 7, 8 times that amount of rollover. But let's just take a kind of a fairly conservative situation and say over the 3 years that rollover is going to triple. Just nice round numbers as well. And so let's say we have rollover of 3.6 million. And then let's say by the end of year 4, it's going to be another 3.6 million. So let's just say over the 3 years, it doubles. So now let's take a scenario where we have the 3.6 million that we originally started with as a conservative kind of middle ground, roughly conservative, like it is more conservative scenarios, but we've seen many, many times 3 years where this thing triples. So let's say it's 3.6 million. Now we take that 3.6 million and we say, let's just take a value down here and say after 3 years, that 3.6 million triples. So let's say it's worth $10 million now. Now, the nice thing is that you haven't paid taxes on it. So yes, you'll have to pay taxes, but you're compounding, call it pre-tax money. So instead of taking taxes and having to grow from there, you're taking the pre-tax amount, you're compounding that, and then you're ultimately paying taxes. So if after 3 years, it has 3x'd, you're at 10.8 million. It's the same long-term capital gains tax, which we've discussed to say, again, it's going to differ state by state, but let's say it's 20% on a federal basis and assume 5% for a state. And let's say, okay, it's 2.7. So the net proceeds there of the rollover net after tax. So let's call it net rollover proceeds. So we don't completely annihilate the columns here. Is 8.1 million. So now let's carry that over here. Say 8.1 million. So in the aggregate, the total proceeds, we're looking at $15.8 million versus in this case 11.025. If you were to say, like, how much more is it? I mean, it's 43% more based on allowing the money to roll over. Now, again, if things were to grow, right? So let's just say, let's make a chart here. Let's say if the equity rollover doubles, triples, quadruples, 5x, I'd say most likely, 3 to 6 is kind of the range. I mean, can it be an outlier one way or the other? Sure. It's not going to be less than 2 if you're picking the right kind of party. Now let's move these across. All right, so let's look at a sensitivity analysis kind of across multiples. So let's say, okay, the proceeds are going to be the same, right, in each scenario. The interest is going to be the same in each scenario. What you have is this tremendous upside where if the rollover starts to hit some big numbers, which it has in many cases, so let's just take the multiple 2 times the rollover amount times 0.75, so that we're baking in some assumption for taxes there. Now let's multiply this across. Now we're starting to look at some really big numbers, right? So this is where things get really exciting. Is that, if it 2x's, yeah, okay, you're at $13 million versus 11. But again, if you start to hit a 5x on that rollover piece, well, now you're at 21 million. I mean, now you're at 23. So let's just take this and so let's make this look slightly nicer. But let's compare and say, okay, versus the 100% sale, like how much better are we doing? And let's just take it as a percentage. Now, this is the exciting, this is the conclusion, right? If the rollover 2x's, you're going to do 19% better than in the scenario where you sold 100% of the business at closing. If it 3x's, you're 43% better. If it 4x's, you're 68% better. If you 5x, it's 92. And generally speaking, if we're north of 5x on the equity rollover, even at a 30% amount of the sale of the business, like you're 2xing. That's where that second bite at the apple is more valuable than the first. And it happens. Again, watch our last video about how to kind of vet out the right type of counterparty and who you want to enter into one of these arrangements with. But this is tremendously valuable, and it's something that we want to take advantage of every situation where it's logical to do so. So that's the idea today. Does it make sense in some scenarios to sell 100% of the business? Absolutely. Is it ever a bad idea to do that? No. But could there be a better situation if you are willing to take a little bit more time, if some of the proceeds, if there's that tremendous amount of confidence and vetting process of evaluating whether the rollover is good to take, if it's a good partner to partner with, then yeah, it can be very lucrative. And this kind of paints the picture. Last time we talked about it more thematically, more qualitatively. In this video, I wanted to talk more specifically about the numbers. So depending on how many turns or how many uh, what the multiple, if you will, of growth on that equity rollover component looks like. And again, it's kind of 3 to 5, a lot of times where we see it. It can make the difference of 40% better over a 3-year period, up to 100% better. And again, we've seen situations where a second bite at the apple is even bigger than the first. But that's the idea for today. Rollover equity visualized, how the numbers actually work. Hope the week finishes up well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. We'll see everyone next time.